This episode is brought to you by the Pelora Group.
Welcome back to Winning Through Culture.
I'm Tim Flanagan.
And I'm Amanda Kramer.
When culture's not a priority, people aren't a priority. Having an intentional focus helps you as a leader remain impactful and relevant as you move your business forward.
Welcome to Winning Through Culture. So welcome back to another episode of Winning Through Culture. I am super excited for the guest that I have with me today. She is an esteemed colleague of mine and somebody that constantly reminds me to be radically candid. And today I have Amy Macari with me. So we're going to be talking about grit. Really, what is it? What does it mean? Entrepreneurs have it. Some are trying to find it. How do you roll that into building a healthy, sustainable culture and ultimately impacting the community that you're in? So research by Dr. Angela Duckworth, who is the author of Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance, shows that grit, it better predicts success than talent or IQ in several professions, including entrepreneurship. So we're going to hop in and have a very candid dialogue around really what is grit, how do you find it, and really how does that come to fruition in the businesses that you are building as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, ultimately in your personal life too. So Amy, thanks for being with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be referred to as an esteemed colleague. I think that's the first time I've had that. So that's fantastic.
You're someone I lean on all the time, so I'm excited for the dialogue. So let's hop in first with really what does grit personally mean to you and how you have seen that come to fruition over the course of your tenure in the business.
Oh, well, thanks. So let's see. I'm glad that we're talking about grit because that's one of the things I say sometimes like, hey, is there a way to measure for grit? And I actually brushed off Dr. Duckworth's study and no, there's not. So it's not just me that doesn't have the answer to that, right? How to measure grit. And honestly, I looked up the definition. I was like, let me be prepared for this, right? Let's look up the definition. What does Webster have to say, right? And to your point, I think you kind of said the latter, which is, right, passion, perseverance, kind of that continual effort towards a goal, even if it's a very long-term goal, right, that you're working towards. The other one is, just kind of gravel, having it in your shoe, right? That term of grit. And sometimes I think it's a little bit of that too, right? So if I think about it that way, it's sometimes there's just this nagging, aching thing in your shoe and you can't get rid of it. And that's kind of how I think grit kind of manifests itself in some situations, right? It's dragging something along. And I don't mean that you should drag something along that's not something you're passionate about, right? But it's really kind of dragging that along because you have to get through the good times, the bad times, right? And it's the gravel in your shoe that just won't go away. And I feel like that's that feeling of grit that I have inside me sometimes, right? It's just by sheer perseverance, I'm going to get through this.
And I think your background really leans well into that. So you were on I'm going to say the ground floor building a bank. So Carolina Premier Bank. And I won't talk about how long ago that was, but you had to have gravel in your shoe for that. Grit showed up in so many instances. And I know you're talking about the highs and the lows and coming alongside. I mean, you literally helped build a business. So do you have some of those examples from when you were doing that at the bank or even, in our daily life, because we get to work together all the time, where you really see that constant manifestation of grit almost propelling you forward?
Yeah. So, and I'll say in my career now, in my career then, the one kind of thing was I always believed and had passion in the purpose. And I know that's something that you mentioned, which is, and this is for me personally, the purpose when I was in a community bank was I really truly believed in the good that community bank could do within the communities they serve, right? For the small businesses, for the people that lived in that community, having access to banking, to bankers, to consultants, right? And that was something where it was a need that people had that we could serve. And so for every time you had an up or a down, and in banking, you have this regulation, that regulation, the FDIC is coming, the NC State's coming, whatever that might be. That was really what kind of helped us to keep going, which is we are offering, in community banking specifically, we are offering something that is a need that we have to fill for our community. That's what drives me, right? Here, I think I see it with a lot of the advisor entrepreneurs is the need that drives them is they believe in what they're doing so passionately for their clients that when you get, kicked sometimes, you have a bad day. That's when the gravel really bothers you in your shoe, right? But it's like you still are getting to that destination. And I would say so number one, I don't know if you could have grit without having passion of purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, otherwise you would take your shoe off and dump it out and put it back on, right? Like,
Yes.
you know that little bit of gravel that's in your shoe is actually helping you maybe move faster or maybe slow down at times to really reflect on your path and what you're doing. And ultimately, all comes full circle for you being able to fulfill that need that you see, that gap in the world that you feel you're stepping into, your unique genius coming to the table, serving the community. If from a community bank standpoint, serving the client that's looking to build their legacy and want to make sure that, everyone's taken care of. There's so many ways in which you can do that. But I think that's really, really cool. And in your regular day job, right, you get to interact with various types of entrepreneurs. I know we specifically work with advisors, but you're talking to people, centers of influence, you're networking, you're doing all those things. And I know this conversation comes up. So when you think about those dialogues that you're having with entrepreneurs that you're connecting with, what is the thing that they most often point to that helps them keep their grit, right? That helps them lean into that thing that's honestly not measurable. When you do have that really, you get a decline or somebody says no or whatever that might look like, that bad day, what are some of the things you're seeing and hearing in those conversations?
The number one thing that I see in most entrepreneurs that I work with, either advisors or outside of that, or even that I've kind of worked with in my past, is really hyper-focused goals. So, and I know we have this kind of conversation a lot where it's, you can't be all things to all people, things like that. But it's a very, very hyper-focused specific goal that really, it helps to take that noise away. So for example, it's like, we're going to hit X amount, whatever it might be, right? Like everybody has their own goal. It could be a personal goal, a professional goal, a familial goal, whatever that may be. But it's really honing in on what is that one thing that's driving you? And what is that one thing you're driving towards? And I do think that that is kind of the highest factor of success, which is, you know what? We didn't hit it today, but we're going to keep at it again tomorrow. We didn't hit it today. We're going to keep at it again tomorrow, right? It's just a very hyper-focused goal. And I'll give you a personal example, which is I did a Camino this year. And so if I can kind of bring this back to the business sense, which is this, I walked 20 miles a day, a lot of it in the rain, a lot of it with mud in my shoes, right? But the fact was my focus was getting from one place to the next. And there was I didn't have the choice to have a stopping point. I didn't have a choice. I mean, I guess I did, right? But the fact was, I didn't have a car. I didn't have a bike. No one was going to carry me and no one was coming to pick me up, right? I was singularly set on that goal of getting from point A to point B. That's a hyper simplistic example, but that's where I see business owners when they have a hyper specific goal of getting from point A to point B. And regardless as if you're walking in the rain, the mud, the sun, and with a beautiful view, right? You keep walking. But I had a purpose. My purpose was I wanted to get to that next place, right? I had to get to that next place because that's where I was going to shower and eat. But also, right? Like failing's not an option, right?
Well, I think you're reframing what failure is in that way. So you using the Camino as the example, you didn't have a bike, you didn't have somebody who was coming to get you. You weren't just going to get an Uber and go from place to place. You set out to say, no, I am going to go from point A to point B day after day after day, because at the end of it, I want that collective momentum to be able to say, I did this. And I know you shared the story with me and now you're sharing it with a lot more people, but you actually built a community to help you reframe your mindset when you were on the Camino, because you were doing it alone. Now, there are a lot of people that were around you. You were going through towns, you were staying in different locations, but you almost built a community of people who had a very similar purpose. So maybe talk a little bit about how, if you're able to, even if you are going at it alone, if you are in the term that we like to say a solopreneur, what does that look like in the sense of the role that a community can play in helping you reframe and making sure that, your grit is still intact?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I had a community of people around me. It was a very supportive community, on that walk specific. But I feel like that's probably the closest I've ever felt to some of the solopreneurs, right, that we work with, which is being a solopreneur is it's super lonely. It can be very lonely. And so having like-minded individuals to really kind of lift you up, right, on those bad days and remind you of like, here's the purpose, right? Here's why you're doing what you're doing. It's so vastly important. And to your point, like it doesn't necessarily have to be where if you are a solopreneur, you don't have to have a team that you hire that works around you that's doing that, right? But it's just people with like a shared that understand your vision and share it with you. It could be your spouse, it could be your children, right? It could be anyone. But I think that really does help the grit, right? I had a conversation just yesterday, right? Where it was, I worked for something for a really long time and it did not pan out the way I wanted it to. It was a bummer. But you know what? I was able to call to other people who've experienced it in their life and talk to them. You know, I have a circle of, I'm lucky that I get to work with people like you and people with other people on our team, but I have mentors and things where I can go back and like, this really sucked, right? And they can they go, okay, you can be sad about it for now, but tomorrow's a new day, right? Because you have no choice, Amy, but to get up and walk to that next stop. Right. So I think that that's where it's super important. Now, those people shared a very similar mission with me, right? People on the Camino also understood the passion for fulfilling that walk. People in our industry really, or at least at our firm, share a passion for putting the client first and kind of evangelizing what we can do to help people, right? So that it becomes easier. And that's where you build in an affinity-like support system.
Well, and it's almost in the sense that you're utilizing that purpose almost as a compass, that directional support of where you're going and the community that you put around yourself. Like you said, whether it's a mentor or if it is somebody that's within the business on your team, or it's just someone in your life who's experienced the ups and the downs. We all have that. Life is full of them, business, personal, it doesn't matter. You ultimately have a sense of direction. So how you choose to forge your path is completely up to you, but you're not alone in that if you invite people into the conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you made a good comment with forge your path, right? Because I don't want it to also seem like, failure's not an option. I think I used that. We're not, you can edit it out, right? If we need to. However, what I think is important is sometimes the path you're walking down might be the wrong path.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you stop the journey. You just go a different direction, right? So I think that's still that's where that singular purpose is so important. It doesn't mean you don't change your business plan. It doesn't mean you don't change how you're approaching things, right? But it's the end in mind. And that's years down the road, right? Your BHAG, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and I think oftentimes, you and I get to work together and we've had a lot of conversations about the evolution of your purpose. So have you sat down and really observed how your purpose is evolving in your business? And are you taking, the grit that is in your shoe, the gravel that's in your shoe, and realizing that at some point you probably do need to stop and assess what that looks like and feels like for you? And then make sure that where you're going is exactly where you want to be headed and change your path. Ultimately, what you're doing is purposeful and makes an impact, but it doesn't mean you have to do it the same way just because somebody else did. Like how many people have walked a Camino? They did not walk the exact same steps that you did, right? But they still successfully got to the end.
Yeah. And I love that. I know we keep going back to it is purpose and perseverance, right? That is the definition of grit, right? A shared perseverance. But I love the gravel in your shoe because to your point, sometimes you just got to sit down on a rock, have a good cry, empty your shoe, take it off, but then keep on going.
You don't even have to just have a cry on a rock. Just close your door. It's okay. No matter where you are.
That's
Turn on that really loud music in your car, whatever that is.
Yeah. But that's the support group, right? And that's when you have a good support system around you. They let you feel the pain, but just for long enough, right? Like just for long enough and then help you to get there. And, a lot of it is internal, right? You just have this internal drive because of the purpose. So the purpose kind of is all encompassing. But I would say that community of people with a shared vision and a shared purpose is really, really helpful to kind of keep you going on maybe some of the bad days, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, as they think about that and they're figuring out where their own sense of grit is coming from, being able to scale grit as a leader in a culture really is intentional. So there is a growth mindset, and you alluded to it just a little bit ago, is that, you need to experience the pain of that unfortunate situation or that bad day just long enough. But tomorrow is a new day, right? The next call you make is a new connection, a new opportunity for it not to feel that way. And oftentimes I feel, we come to that, kind of fork in the path. I know we're having a lot of references to your Camino here, but you come to that fork in the path and it's like, I can either have a growth mindset in this moment and reflect and choose something different, or I can have a fixed mindset and allow that not so great day to define more than just that day, that week, that month, that quarter, whatever it is. And so I think maybe if you can lean a little bit more into, you talk a lot with entrepreneurs about having a growth mindset specific to the business that we're in, but I think it's applicable across all industries. What is that growth mindset? How do you see that showing up for entrepreneurs? Or what are some of the ways that you help encourage entrepreneurs to reframe that fixed mindset into a growth mindset?
I mean, I think it's probably, just looking, it's a good time, right? This is a timely conversation. I don't know where you're releasing it, but, we just sat through business planning, right? And there's reflection, right? And then there's future projection. You're doing that all at once at the end of the year, right? You're looking back on and the business owners are doing this, right? Like, what were the successes of 2024? What, if anything, would we need to postmortem because they could have gone better, right? So you're doing that. But then you're also kind of looking at what do you want to accomplish in 2025, right? So we have exercises. Everybody has some sort of business planning exercise that they're normally doing. Here's where I notice the biggest things, which is, when you talk to someone who is planning and they just have a laundry list of the negatives of 2024, right? It's going to be hard for them to go into 2025 with a positive mindset. And so I think with entrepreneurs, if you have grit and fixed mindset do not exist collectively, right? If you have a fixed mindset, I don't believe that you can have grit. That's just my opinion. I'm not an expert on anything. I've done no research. And this is just from life, right? And by the way, I find myself doing this and then having to talk to myself and go, get a grip, right?
Yeah.
Stop it. That's ridiculous. That fixed mindset's not getting you anywhere.
You have to check yourself. I have to check myself. I have to come to you and say, Amy, I need you to check me here, right? But I have you in my circle.
But where you will see, and so this is getting back to the grit conversation, it's how do you I don't know that you can train grit. You could train discipline in people. Yeah. I don't necessarily know that grit is something, I feel like it's an innately in someone, right? And I do feel that it's easier to work with those that have a high level of grit and a growth mindset, entrepreneurially, just being honest, right? Because it's fun. Here's what I see in business owners where they're creating culture with grit, truly that they have open, authentic, candid conversations. Mm-hmm. They make a safe space for their team in order to share ideas and share discernments, right? And say, hey, I don't think this is going to work, right? But then they also hold them to, I have heard what you said out of all the ways things aren't going to work, but now I need you to tell me how we're going to make something work, right? Or what is going to, right? We need a yes. We talk about this all the time, which is, in certain areas of the business, I talk to a lot of compliance people in my life, right? And supervision, we have a great team here at our firm because it's what I love about our team is they might tell you no, but they're going to say no, but here's what we can do, right? And I think that when you create an environment like that, where you have an open and honest exchange of ideas, you're not afraid to bring people in that are smarter than you, better than you, right? That fosters folks to then be able to have that shared mission and that shared vision. And I think that businesses that I see that are very successful do just that, right? They don't stay on the negative. They don't bring people in that they feel that they can that they're better than, right? You always want to bring people in that are better than you, right? As any kind of leader. I think that's what I see most with organizations that seem to have a grit. But really it just comes down to do you all have that shared passion? It doesn't matter whatever happens. We're doing this, right? We're continually working towards this goal. So you got to bring in people that share your vision. That's the most, I think, important thing with some of these teams. So it's they have a shared vision. They're all out there to hit the same goal. It's not bifurcated based on what your role is, right? If the organization does well, everyone does well. Those I would say kind of CEOs that I work with, COIs I work with that mindset, those are always the most successful.
Yeah, well, and I have to agree because, in our daily work, which we use as true examples, right? The good, the bad, and the not so great, we really use them as part of this podcast to help people think about different topics differently. Honestly, you have the fork in the path and you can say, okay, cool, I'm a fixed mindset. This is what it is. Great. Or you have that growth moment where you look at yourself, you figure out the gravel that's in your shoe and you say, that is there on purpose. And I know that it's helping me move faster, move differently, however that works out for you, but coming back to center and having the opportunity to really business plan effectively around your purpose and your passion. And we've had podcast episodes on what's the difference between purpose and passion. Please go listen to that one if you haven't. It's a great one. I really enjoyed that one. And we just talked about, we're starting a new year. So we're in 2025. Have you taken the opportunity to reflect as a business leader, as an owner, an entrepreneur, solo, whatever you are, whatever title you give yourself? What is it that is truly going to say, you get to the end of 2026 and you're like, I did that. And I did it because I kept my grit. I honed it. I honored it. I found ways to, increase it if you can. Books, podcasts, whatever that might look like for you. Going on a Camino, I think also helped propel your grit, right? Reminded you that it was there and that you had more than you probably even thought you did. And I think it's important just to have that time. Make sure that you have a plan, you set your purpose, you write it out, you type it out, you AI it, whatever you need to do, but that anybody you bring in your circle shares that same commitment to helping you get there. But they're there, they're in your corner. That's what I think when it comes down to grit and having the opportunity to really foster it. It's making sure that you have people in your corner that are going to push you when you notice that gravel in your shoe.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, Amy. I know this was a short conversation, but I think a very meaningful one. And, you and I know we both have read the book Grit, but if you haven't, please take some opportunity to do an audiobook for it. And there's a lot of other resources out there about helping you find your passion, your purpose, and ultimately making sure that you're continuously moving in that direction. So we hope you found some of these highlights and points impactful for your daily life. And we look forward to seeing you on another episode.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Winning Through Culture.
Until next time, stay intentional, be impactful.
Because your culture matters.